The people of Red Hollow liked to believe they could judge a stranger before the dust settled around a wagon's wheels. Sometimes they guessed right. Most of the time, they only proved how little they understood. Late in the spring of 1893, the entire town gathered outside the stage depot for a wedding that had not yet begun. Children balanced on hitching rails. Storekeepers leaned against wooden posts. Women shaded their eyes beneath wide-brimmed hats. Even the blacksmith stepped away from his forge. Nobody had come to celebrate. They had come to watch. Because the groom was unlike anyone else in 3 counties. Caleb Blackwood stood a few yards away beside his bay gelding, Atlas. At 42, he was known across northern Wyoming as the man who could repair a broken windmill, track a wounded steer across frozen ground, and survive mountain winters that defeated younger men. His broad shoulders carried years of ranch work. His dark skin had been weathered by relentless sun, snow, and wind. He rarely smiled in public. Not because he lacked kindness. Because life had slowly taught him that silence often demanded more respect than words. 6 years earlier, influenza had taken his wife before the first snow melted. Their infant son followed 2 days later. Since then, the ranch had remained quiet. Too quiet. Neighbors occasionally suggested he remarry. He always declined. Until one winter evening when Pastor Samuel visited with an unexpected proposal. A church mission in San Francisco had begun arranging marriages between respectable frontier ranchers and Chinese immigrant women left without families after years of hardship. Caleb listened without interrupting. Finally, the pastor asked only one question. "What kind of wife are you hoping for?" Caleb stared into the fireplace before answering. "I don't need someone beautiful. I don't need someone educated. I don't need someone who can impress the town. I'd rather have an honest woman who wants a peaceful life." That answer traveled farther than he expected. Months later, a letter arrived. One woman had accepted. Her name was Mei Lin Zhao. She was 25 years old. Widowed? No. Never married. Family? None willing to claim her. Occupation? A seamstress. The pastor smiled as he folded the letter. "It sounds like she's looking for exactly what you're offering." Caleb only nodded. He had never imagined romance. He hoped for companionship. Mutual respect. Perhaps, in time. A place that felt like home again. The stagecoach rounded the final bend just after noon. Its wheels rattled over the uneven street before stopping outside the depot. The driver climbed down first. 2 traveling salesmen followed. Then an elderly woman. Finally, a young Chinese woman stepped carefully onto the wooden platform. Conversation across the street stopped all at once. She wasn't plain. She was breathtaking. Long black hair rested in a single loose braid over one shoulder. Her traveling dress, though faded from weeks on the road, had once been crafted with remarkable care. Deep blue fabric traced a fitted waist before falling into a practical skirt meant for walking rather than fashion. A weathered brown coat hung across her shoulders. Dust covered the hem. Exhaustion shadowed her face. Yet nothing could disguise the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. Caleb noticed something else. She held a narrow wooden chest against her side. Not luggage. Not supplies. Just one carefully locked box, wrapped in worn leather straps. The driver reached toward it. "I'll carry that for you, miss." She took one quick step backward. "No." The word came softly. But firmly. "I'll carry it." The driver raised both hands. "Suit yourself." The crowd exchanged curious glances. One rancher chuckled. "Must have gold inside." Another answered. "Or trouble." Caleb walked forward, removing his hat. "Miss Zhao." She studied him for several seconds before speaking. Mr. Blackwood. His voice remained calm. Welcome to Red Hollow. For the briefest moment, relief softened her expression. Then it disappeared again, replaced by the same cautious look she'd worn stepping off the coach. She offered a polite nod. Thank you for waiting. The pastor introduced them. Necessary papers were signed. A short prayer followed. No music. No celebration. Only a handful of witnesses beneath Wyoming's endless blue sky. When Pastor Samuel finally declared them husband and wife, Caleb noticed something peculiar. Most brides looked toward their husbands. Mei Lin looked toward the hills. Scanning. Watching. As though expecting someone to appear at any moment. The feeling lasted only seconds. Then she composed herself once more. During lunch inside the hotel dining room, several women attempted friendly conversation. Have you traveled far? Yes. Do you have family nearby? No. What brings you all the way to Wyoming? She smiled politely. A new beginning. Simple. Respectful. Completely unrevealing. Every answer ended the conversation without sounding rude. Caleb recognized the skill. Someone who had learned to survive by saying only what was necessary. The ride back to his ranch took nearly 3 hours. Rolling grasslands slowly gave way to pine-covered hills. A narrow creek followed the trail before disappearing into cottonwood trees. Neither spoke much. Neither seemed uncomfortable with silence. Atlas carried them steadily beneath the afternoon sun while Mei Lin's mare followed behind. Halfway home, a hawk suddenly burst from nearby brush. Mei Lin reacted before Caleb even saw the bird. Her hand slipped beneath her coat. Not searching for balance. Reaching for something hidden. Only after realizing the hawk posed no danger did she slowly lower her arm. Caleb pretended not to notice. But he had. Years spent driving cattle through dangerous country had sharpened instincts difficult to fool. That wasn't the reaction of a frightened traveler. It was the reaction of someone accustomed to violence. The ranch appeared just before sunset. A sturdy log house overlooked a wide valley bordered by snow-capped mountains. Smoke drifted peacefully from the stone chimney. 2 horses grazed beside a split-rail fence. A red barn stood farther uphill. It's not fancy, Caleb said. I wasn't expecting fancy. She stepped onto the porch. Instead of admiring the view, her eyes immediately examined every window. Every corner. Every approach to the property. Only after finishing her quiet inspection did she finally smile. It's beautiful. Inside, the cabin felt warm without feeling crowded. Everything had a place. Tools hung neatly along one wall. Shelves held preserved vegetables and flour. A cast-iron stove radiated comfortable heat through the main room. Caleb carried her small travel bag toward the hallway. The room on the left is yours. She looked surprised. Mine. You'll have your own key. He handed her a small iron key attached to a leather strap. If anything inside needs changing, tell me. She accepted it carefully. Thank you. When she opened the bedroom door, she stopped. Sunlight streamed across a handmade quilt folded neatly over a pine bed. Fresh curtains framed a window overlooking the valley. Wildflowers rested inside a small glass jar beside the dresser. Caleb cleared his throat. My neighbor insisted every room should have flowers. They were right. For the first time that day, her smile reached her eyes. Later that evening they shared supper together. Beef stew. Fresh biscuits. Wild honey. Conversation remained easy. She complimented the cooking. He admitted his elderly neighbor had taught him enough to avoid starving. She laughed quietly. The sound lingered longer than either expected. Then, A loud crack echoed outside. Not thunder. A branch breaking somewhere beyond the barn. Mei Lin's chair scraped sharply against the wooden floor. She was already standing. One hand hidden beneath her coat. Breathing slow. Listening. Caleb remained seated. It's probably an elk. She didn't answer. Several long seconds passed before another sound followed. Nothing. Absolute silence. Only then did she slowly sit back down. I'm sorry, she whispered. You don't have anything to apologize for. She lowered her eyes. I'm still getting used to quiet places. Caleb looked toward the dark window. Quiet wasn't what disturbed her. It was everything that had happened before she arrived. And whatever haunted her had clearly traveled all the way from California to Wyoming with her. The following morning, Caleb woke before sunrise. That had been his habit for nearly 20 years. The ranch demanded discipline long before it rewarded hard work. By the time the eastern sky began turning pale orange, he had already fed the horses, checked the water troughs, and carried fresh hay into the barn. Usually, he worked alone. This morning, another pair of footsteps crossed the yard. Mei Lin emerged from the cabin wearing a simple brown work dress beneath her blue traveling coat. Her long braid rested over one shoulder, and her sleeves were already rolled above her wrists. She carried 2 steaming mugs. I wasn't sure how you take your coffee, she said. So I brought sugar separately. Caleb accepted the cup with a grateful nod. Thank you. She looked toward the pasture. What needs doing first? You don't have to start working today. I'd rather keep busy. There was no complaint in her voice. No obligation. Only quiet determination. Caleb pointed toward a damaged fence where several rails had loosened after a late spring storm. I'll repair that section. I can help. You've repaired fences before. She smiled faintly. I've repaired more difficult things. The answer lingered in Caleb's thoughts long after they reached the pasture. Throughout the morning, she worked with surprising confidence. She measured replacement rails without asking. Held posts steady while Caleb secured them. Even handled the heavy hammer with practiced rhythm. Nothing about her movements suggested someone raised in comfort. Whoever Mei Lin had been before arriving in Wyoming. Life had required her to learn quickly. Around noon, Caleb climbed onto the wagon to retrieve another bundle of lumber. When he looked down again, he found Mei Lin staring toward the western ridge. Not absent-mindedly. Watching. Her expression had become unreadable. What is it? He asked. She blinked. I thought I saw someone. Caleb followed her gaze. Only wind stirred through the pine trees. No one's there. I hope you're right. That evening, Red Hollow welcomed them with a small supper organized by the church. The gathering was intended as a gesture of kindness. Instead, it became something else entirely. The dining hall filled with ranchers, merchants, and neighboring families. Many greeted Caleb warmly. Most greeted Mei Lin politely. A few never looked at her at all. Among them stood Owen Briggs, a cattle buyer known for spreading rumors faster than livestock prices. He studied Mei Lin across the room before muttering just loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Funny. I've never seen a bride spend more time watching the doors than looking at her husband. Several people chuckled. Mei Lin continued eating without responding. Caleb calmly set down his fork. Owen. The single word carried enough weight that the room immediately quieted. If you've got something to say, say it to me. Briggs shrugged with a crooked smile. No offense meant. I'm just making conversation. Caleb held his gaze another moment before returning to his meal. The conversation shifted elsewhere. Yet Mei Lin barely touched another bite. As they rode home beneath a sky crowded with stars, Caleb finally asked, "Does attention like that bother you?" "No." She answered too quickly. "It worries me." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because people notice things." "What kind of things?" "My mistakes." "Nothing more." The silence returned. 3 days passed peacefully. Too peacefully. The ranch slowly began feeling less like a stranger's house and more like a shared home. Mei Lin cleaned the neglected garden beside the porch. She mended Caleb's torn work shirts with remarkable precision. She even convinced the old ranch dog, Copper, to follow her everywhere despite the animal's usual distrust of strangers. For the first time in years, laughter occasionally echoed across the valley. Caleb found himself listening for it. Then, on the 4th evening, everything changed. Atlas suddenly began snorting inside the barn. Copper barked once. Then again. Long sharp, warning barks. Caleb reached for the Winchester hanging beside the front door. "I'll check." "I'm coming." "No. I know how to stay quiet." Before he could object further, she had already slipped into the darkness behind him. Together they crossed the yard. Moonlight washed silver across the fields. Nothing moved. Until Caleb noticed it. Fresh hoofprints. 3 horses. They had approached within 50 yards of the house. Circled the property. Then disappeared back toward the hills. Whoever the riders were. They had made no attempt to steal livestock. No gates had been opened. Nothing was missing. "They were watching," Mei Lin whispered. "You've seen tracks like these before?" Her breathing slowed. "Yes." "You know who they belong to?" She looked away. "I don't." Caleb knew she was lying. Not because her voice changed. Because her eyes never met his. The following afternoon, Caleb rode into town for supplies. Mei Lin remained at the ranch. As he loaded sacks of flour into the wagon, Sheriff Thomas Mercer stepped onto the boardwalk carrying a folded sheet of paper. "You've got a minute?" "Sure." The sheriff unfolded the document. "I need to ask you something." Caleb glanced down. His heartbeat slowed. Across the top of the page, bold black letters read, "Wanted." Beneath them appeared an illustration. A woman's face. Long braided hair. Calm eyes. There was no mistaking her. Mei Lin Zhao reward, $5,000 wanted alive. The accusation beneath the portrait struck even harder. Wanted for the murder of industrial contractor Victor Harlan in California. Considered armed and dangerous. Caleb stared at the page without speaking. Sheriff Mercer watched him carefully. "You know her?" "She's my wife." The sheriff exhaled slowly. "I figured you should hear it from me before someone else showed you." "Where did this come from?" "Came in yesterday with the freight mail." "Official?" "Looks that way." A crowd had already begun forming nearby. Whispers spread faster than prairie fire. "That's the woman who married Blackwood." "I knew something felt off." "She's been hiding." "Imagine sleeping under the same roof as a killer." Every sentence reached Caleb's ears. He ignored them all. Instead, he folded the poster once more and handed it back to the sheriff. "What happens now?" "I don't know." Mercer answered honestly. "If those papers are legitimate, federal bounty hunters will eventually come." The ride home felt longer than ever before. Every mile gave Caleb another chance to convince himself the poster had to be wrong. The woman who quietly planted flowers beside his porch. The woman who thanked him for every meal. The woman who smiled whenever Copper followed her. None of it fit the image of a murderer. As the ranch came into view, he saw Mei Lin kneeling beside the garden, brushing soil from her hands. She smiled the moment she noticed him returning. Then, She saw his face. The smile disappeared. She already knew. Caleb climbed down from the wagon without a word. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, he asked the only question that mattered. Did you kill Victor Harlan? Mei Lin closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was no fear left. Only exhaustion. Yes. The single word settled heavily between them. Caleb waited. She swallowed slowly before continuing. But not for the reason they believe. The word lingered between them like smoke after a gunshot. Yes. Mei Lin didn't look away. She had spent too many years hiding behind half-truths to waste another moment pretending. Caleb stood motionless beside the wagon, one hand resting against the weathered wood. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass across the valley, but neither of them seemed to notice. Finally, he spoke. Come inside. She frowned slightly. You're not going to ask me to leave. I said come inside. His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't forgiving, either. It was steady. For now, that was enough. The cabin felt strangely smaller than it had the night before. Caleb removed his hat and laid it on the table before taking a seat across from her. Between them rested complete silence. Outside, Copper wandered across the porch, unaware that the entire future of the ranch was being decided only a few feet away. Caleb folded his hands. I'm only going to ask once. She nodded. Then tell me everything. No lies. No half-answers. If we're staying under the same roof. I deserve the truth. Mei Lin lowered her eyes to the grain of the wooden table. For several long moments, she searched for the right place to begin. Not because she wanted to hide anything. Because some memories refused to come out in the order they happened. They called it a labor company. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. But everyone inside knew it wasn't. Caleb listened without interrupting. I came to California when I was 16. My father had already died. My mother passed during the voyage. I owed money before I even stepped onto American soil. She smiled bitterly. Debt can become chains faster than iron. She described the railroad camps. The overcrowded boarding houses. The women forced to sew uniforms and cook for labor crews while every meal, every blanket, every day's shelter was added to a ledger they could never repay. If anyone tried to leave. She stopped. They were found. Caleb noticed her hands beginning to tremble. You don't have to rush. She nodded once before continuing. The man in charge wasn't Victor Harlan. The newspapers never mentioned the real owner. Harlan only managed one operation. There were others. Bigger men. Powerful men. They needed someone to disappear. So they chose me. Caleb frowned. You said you killed him. I did. Another silence followed. But not the way they're claiming. The memory returned with painful clarity. Rain hammered against the roof of the warehouse. A young Chinese girl, barely 14, had tried escaping through the loading yard. Victor Harlan caught her before she reached the gate. He dragged her back inside by the hair. The workers watched. Nobody moved. Because anyone who interfered usually vanished before sunrise. I couldn't watch again. Mei Lin's voice cracked for the first time. I picked up an iron lantern. I only wanted him to let her go. Instead, Harlan drew his revolver. He fired first. The room exploded into panic. Workers scattered. Someone shoved Mei Lin from behind. Harlan slipped across the wet floor while raising his pistol again. The lantern struck his shoulder. He stumbled backward. His head hit the edge of an iron boiler. He never stood up again. Caleb remained silent. She wasn't describing murder. She was reliving it. I waited for someone to tell the truth. No one did. The girl disappeared the next morning. The guard swore I attacked him without reason. And the company. She laughed without humor. They needed a villain. So they printed one. Caleb leaned back slowly. Then why run? Why not stay and fight? She met his eyes. Fight who? The sheriff worked for them. The judge owed them favors. Every witness either disappeared or became too frightened to speak. She reached beneath her chair. For a brief moment Caleb stiffened. Instead of drawing a weapon, she pulled out the narrow wooden chest she had refused to let anyone touch since arriving. She rested it gently on the table. This is why they never stopped hunting me. She removed a small brass key hidden beneath the jade pendant around her neck. The lock clicked open. Inside, there was no gold. No jewelry. Only carefully wrapped bundles of papers. Letters. Account books. Official receipts. Property deeds. Names. Dozens of names. Caleb lifted one ledger carefully. Every page contained payments. Bribes. Rail shipments. Missing workers. False contracts. Even signatures belonging to county officials. His expression hardened. This could destroy them. Yes. And that's exactly why they want me dead. Before Caleb could ask another question, Copper erupted into furious barking outside. Not once. Not twice. Again and again. Atlas whinnied sharply from the barn. Caleb crossed the room in 3 quick strides and looked through the front window. 3 riders stood nearly 200 yards away along the ridge. Their horses remained perfectly still. Watching the ranch. Watching the cabin. One of them slowly lifted a spyglass toward the house. Caleb's jaw tightened. They found you. Mei Lin didn't need to ask how he knew. She recognized the posture immediately. Professional trackers. Patient. Methodical. Never rushing unless they were certain. Her face lost all color. They won't stop. They never stop. Caleb quietly reached for the Winchester hanging beside the fireplace. He checked the chamber. Loaded. Then he placed the rifle across the table between them. For the first time since they had met, he looked directly into her eyes. I still haven't answered the only question that matters. She swallowed. What question? Whether I believe you. The barking outside grew louder. The riders remained on the ridge. Waiting. Caleb's gaze never left hers. I'm going to find out the truth. And until I do, no one takes my wife off this ranch. Mei Lin stared at him in stunned silence. For years, everyone who learned her name had either tried to arrest her, or abandoned her. Caleb Blackwood had done neither. Outside, one of the distant riders slowly turned his horse toward the valley. The hunt had finally reached Red Hollow. The 3 riders remained on the ridge until dusk. They never approached the ranch. They never called out. They simply watched. It was the kind of patience that unsettled Caleb more than an open threat ever could. Men who wanted trouble usually rode straight through the front gate. Men who waited already believed they had the advantage. That evening, Caleb rode into Red Hollow alone. Sheriff Thomas Mercer was locking the jailhouse when he heard hoofbeats stop outside. I figured you'd come. Caleb stepped onto the boardwalk. I need to know everything you've learned. Mercer unlocked his office and spread the wanted poster across his desk. It arrived with 3 affidavits. Signed by men claiming they witnessed the murder. Caleb scanned each statement. Everyone described the same event. Yet something immediately felt wrong. The wording was nearly identical. Whole paragraphs matched from one page to another. Only the signatures differed. These weren't written by 3 different people, Caleb said quietly. Mercer nodded. I noticed the same thing. They read like one man wrote them all. Caleb looked up. So why issue the bounty? Because the papers carry official seals. And because nobody around here has the authority to challenge officials from California. Mercer leaned back. But something else came with today's freight. He opened a drawer and removed a telegram. I hadn't had time to deliver it. Caleb read the message twice. Then a third time. It had been sent from a federal investigator stationed in Cheyenne. Hold Mei Lin Zhao if located. Evidence has surfaced suggesting corruption involving Victor Harlan's labor company. Federal agents are en route. No order to shoot. No declaration of guilt. Only one instruction. Hold her. Alive. Caleb folded the telegram carefully. That changes everything. It might, Mercer replied. If the evidence is real. Caleb reached home well after dark. Every lamp inside the cabin remained extinguished. For one terrifying second, he thought he had come too late. Then the front door opened just enough for Mei Lin's voice to drift through the darkness. It's me. He exhaled in relief. I didn't light the lamps. I didn't want anyone knowing exactly where we were. He smiled despite the tension. Smart. She hesitated. I've had practice. Just before sunrise. The attack came. Not with gunfire. With fire itself. A flaming torch arced over the fence and landed inside the hay field. Seconds later. Another. Dry grass ignited almost instantly. Copper barked wildly. The horses kicked against their stalls. Caleb grabbed 2 buckets while shouting, barn first. Mei Lin was already running. Together they formed a desperate rhythm. Water. Flames. More water. Smoke rolled across the pasture. As Caleb reached the final burning patch, a rifle cracked from the ridge. The bullet slammed into a fence post inches from his shoulder. The attack had never been about the fire. It was meant to draw him into the open. Down! Mei Lin shouted. She fired a single warning shot toward the hillside. The distant rifle fell silent. Not because she had hit anyone. Because the attackers realized they had lost the element of surprise. Within minutes. Sheriff Mercer arrived with 4 deputies. The mysterious riders disappeared into the mountains without another shot. Among the scorched grass, one deputy discovered something half buried beneath a rock. A leather pouch. Inside were several folded papers. Mercer frowned. Looks like someone dropped these while retreating. Caleb unfolded the first document. His eyes narrowed. It listed payments made to hired bounty hunters. Every payment traced back to a company operating under Victor Harlan's name. The second page contained something even more damaging. Instructions. Recover the ledger. Eliminate Zhao if recovery becomes impossible. Signed only with the initials. E.C. Mei Lin stared at the paper. I know those initials. She whispered the name she had hoped never to hear again. Edgar Crowley. The man who actually owned the labor camps. Harlan only worked for him. Sheriff Mercer looked from the papers to Mei Lin. Then back again. I believe you. It was the first time anyone wearing a badge had ever spoken those words to her. 2 days later. A train carrying federal marshals arrived in Red Hollow. Their leader, Marshal Nathan Briggs, spent nearly 6 hours examining every document from the wooden chest. Every ledger matched bank records. Every signature matched county archives. Every payment could be traced. When he finally closed the final ledger, the room remained silent. He looked directly at Mei Lin. Mrs. Blackwood. You were never the criminal. You were the only surviving witness. The warrant was withdrawn immediately. The bounty was cancelled. Telegrams raced across 3 states ordering Edgar Crowley's arrest. Within weeks, federal officers dismantled the trafficking operation that had hidden behind legitimate railroad contracts for years. Dozens of imprisoned workers were finally released. Several corrupt officials resigned before they could be indicted. Others were taken away in handcuffs. Summer arrived quietly. The gossip in Red Hollow changed almost overnight. The same people who had whispered when Mei Lin first stepped off the stagecoach now crossed the street simply to greet her. Owen Briggs removed his hat one afternoon outside the general store. "I judged you before I knew you. I was wrong." Mei Lin smiled gently. "I've learned that fear makes people say many things they later regret. There isn't much peace in carrying anger forever." Her answer spread through town almost as quickly as the rumors once had. One evening, Caleb rebuilt the final section of the porch that had been damaged during the attack. Mei Lin knelt beside the steps planting wild lupins and Indian paintbrush. The valley glowed beneath the golden light of sunset. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mei Lin broke the silence. "When you first saw that wanted poster, I thought my life here had ended." Caleb set down his hammer. "I won't pretend I wasn't shaken." She looked at him. "Then why didn't you send me away?" He smiled softly. "When I asked for a wife, I said I wanted an honest woman. You gave me the truth. Not immediately. But when it mattered most." He reached for her hand. "The past told me who hunted you. It didn't tell me who you were." A tear slipped down her cheek. No fear remained in it. Only relief. 1 year later. Travelers crossing the Wyoming frontier often stopped at the Blackwood ranch. Some came for water. Others needed food or a place to rest before crossing the mountains. No one was turned away. Inside the cabin, the small wooden chest still rested on a shelf above the stone fireplace. Its lock remained open. Not because its secrets no longer mattered, but because they no longer had to be hidden. Below it hung a simple framed photograph. Caleb. Mei Lin. Copper asleep at their feet. Behind them, fields of wildflowers stretched toward the distant mountains. The ranch that had once stood silent had become filled with laughter, shared meals, and the quiet comfort of belonging. The woman the world had branded an outlaw had finally found something no bounty hunter could ever steal. A home. And the man who expected nothing more than an ordinary bride discovered that the greatest treasure she carried had never been the locked chest. It was the courage to keep believing that somewhere beyond fear, betrayal, and injustice, there was still a place where truth could become the foundation of a family.